A man in a wheelchair flying to his sister's wedding hopes for a peaceful journey. But on American Airlines Flight 1776, peace is not on the itinerary. He's singled out, his pain is questioned, and his character is assassinated in front of a plane full of strangers. The flight crew, led by a relentless attendant, accuses him of faking his disability to get preferential treatment. They corner him, humiliate him, and threaten to remove him from the plane. They thought they were exposing a liar. They had no idea they were confronting a man who had sacrificed his body for his country. And they were about to learn that lesson when he did the one thing they demanded he couldn't do. He stood up. The sterile, recycled air of the Boeing 737 cabin did little to soothe the throbbing in Alex Vance's left leg. Every subtle shift of the plane, as it waited at the gate at Reagan National Airport, sent a fresh, fiery signal from his shattered tibia up to his hip. He stared out the small, oval window, watching the ground crew scurry like ants on the tarmac below their movements, a stark contrast to his own enforced stillness. He hated the wheelchair. He hated the pitying glances, the overly solicitous tones people used, the way parents hushed their children when they pointed. Most of all, he hated the helplessness of it. 6 months ago, he'd been able to run 5 miles before breakfast. Now the 50-foot journey down the jet bridge felt like a marathon. His phone buzzed. A text from his older brother, David. David landed in Dallas. "Mom's a wreck already. Try not to cause a scene when you get here." Alex clenched his jaw. Cause a scene. That was David's favorite phrase for any situation that didn't fit into his perfectly curated corner office life. Alex's career choice was a scene. His injury was a scene. His very existence, it seemed, was an inconvenient, messy scene in the otherwise pristine movie of David's life. He typed back a terse reply, "On my way. Tell Mom I love her." He didn't bother telling David he loved him. The sentiment would have been as welcome as a snake in a sleeping bag. The final passengers were trickling in a chaotic parade of oversized carry-ons and frantic energy. A flight attendant with a name tag that read Brenda and a smile as thin as a razor blade was orchestrating the flow with curt military precision. Her eyes scanned the cabin, and Alex felt them linger on him for a moment too long. He'd seen that look before. It was a cocktail of suspicion and annoyance. He was in a bulkhead seat, 10C, an aisle seat, that offered a little more leg room, a necessity the airline had granted after he'd submitted the mountain of requisite medical paperwork. The wheelchair was already stowed. To the casual observer, he was just a large, athletic-looking black man in his early 30s, occupying a prime piece of airplane real estate. The signs of his recent trauma were invisible beneath his jeans and long-sleeved shirt, save for the subtle, constant tension in his shoulders. Sir Brenda said, her voice sharp, cutting through the cabin noise. She had stopped beside his row. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Alex blinked, pulling himself from his thoughts. "I already showed it to you when I boarded." "I know. I need to see it again. And your documentation, please." A slow, cold dread began to creep up Alex's spine. "My documentation for the pre-boarding, for this seat." Her eyes flicked down toward his legs, then back to his face. The implication was as clear as the plexiglass divider separating first class from the rest of them. He reached into his backpack, his movements slow and deliberate, trying to quell the anger simmering in his gut. He handed her the boarding pass and the doctor's note he'd been advised to carry. The note was crisp, official, detailing the nature of his injury, a comminuted fracture of the tibia and fibula, and the medical necessity for him to keep the leg elevated and straight as much as possible. Brenda scanned the letter with a practiced, dismissive air. She looked less like she was reading it, and more like she was searching for a typo to invalidate the entire thing. It says here you have a leg injury. That's right, Alex said, his voice dangerously quiet. You seem to get down the jet bridge just fine with the agent's assistance. Assistance. Alex almost laughed. The gate agent had pushed his wheelchair. That was the extent of the assistance. It's a wheelchair. It has wheels. A passenger trying to squeeze past them mumbled an apology. Brenda didn't move. She was a bulldog on a leash and she'd just caught a scent. It's just that we have a policy, sir, she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. These seats are reserved for passengers with a demonstrable need. We have to be vigilant against people taking advantage of the system. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Taking advantage. He looked at her at the self-righteous certainty in her eyes, and he saw the entire narrative she had constructed. He wasn't an injured man. He was a scammer. A lazy, entitled freeloader trying to cheat his way into a few extra inches of legroom. The surrounding passengers were now openly staring their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across his chest. All he wanted was to get to Dallas for his sister Amelia's wedding, to endure his brother's condescension, and to not let his mother see how much pain he was really in. That was it. A simple, quiet flight. But Brenda Jenkins had other plans. I can assure you, Alex said, his voice like gravel, my need is demonstrable. Is it? She challenged, her lips curling into a smirk. Because from where I'm standing, you look perfectly fine. The cabin door hissed shut. The finality of the sound echoed the closing of a trap. He was locked in this metal tube, 30,000 feet in the air, with his accuser, his jury, and a silent, watching audience. The weight on his leg suddenly felt insignificant compared to the weight of their collective gaze. And he knew with a sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The hum of the engine spooling up was a low growl that seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the anger coiling in Alex's stomach. The plane began its slow, deliberate taxi away from the gate. But inside the cabin, the tension was anything but slow. Ma'am, I've given you my doctor's note, Alex said, fighting to keep his voice even. Years of training of de-escalating tense situations in darkened alleys and high-stakes interviews were being tested by a flight attendant on a power trip. It's been approved by the airline. I'm not sure what else you want from me. What I want, Sir Brenda said, emphasizing the word as if it were an insult, is to ensure that airline regulations are followed. I have another passenger, an elderly woman who could use this seat. It's a matter of fairness. She gestured vaguely a few rows back. Alex didn't turn. He knew this wasn't about an elderly woman. It was about him. It was about the story Brenda had told herself the moment she saw him. The woman in the window seat, a grandmotherly type named Dorothy, who had introduced herself earlier, leaned over. For heaven's sake, she whispered to Brenda, her voice trembling slightly. Leave the poor man alone. He's clearly in pain. Brenda shot Dorothy a look that could have curdled milk. Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is an official matter. Turning her attention back to Alex, she crossed her arms. Her voice rose in volume, no longer a targeted inquiry, but a public pronouncement. If you are unable to provide sufficient proof of your disability, I will have to ask the captain to return to the gate so you can be reseated or, if necessary, removed from the flight. The threat struck the cabin like a bolt of lightning. The murmuring ceased. Every eye was now fixed on row 10. Removed from the flight. He wouldn't make it to the wedding. Amelia would be devastated. His mother would worry herself sick. And David would be proven right. See, I told you. He always causes a scene. The thought was more painful than the fire in his leg. Alex took a slow, deep breath, forcing the air into his lungs. He could feel his earned heart hammering against his ribs. He thought of his partner, Agent Peterson, and his mantra during high-stress ops: control the space. Control the tempo. Control yourself. Let me be very clear, Alex, said his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone that cut through the recycled air. It was the voice he used just before kicking in a door. You have my medical documents, which are protected under HIPAA, and which I was not required to show you in the first place. You have the approval from your own airline's corporate office. You are now harassing me in front of an entire plane of passengers based on nothing but your own uninformed opinion. You are creating a hostile environment and threatening to deny me travel for which I have paid. If you continue this, you will not be returning to the gate to have me removed. You will be returning to the gate to meet my lawyer. And believe me, he is far more expensive and far less pleasant than I am. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Brenda's face. The mention of lawyers and HIPAA had momentarily pierced her armor of self-righteousness, but it was quickly replaced by stubborn pride. She had gone too far to back down now without losing face. Are you threatening me, sir? I am informing you of the consequences of your actions, Alex corrected calmly. From the front of the plane, a man in a pilot's uniform. The first officer began walking down the aisle, drawn by the commotion. He had a weary, harassed look on his face. Brenda, what's the problem here? This passenger is refusing to cooperate, Brenda announced, her voice filled with vindication. He's occupying a priority seat, and I have reason to believe his disability claim is fraudulent. Now he's threatening me. The first officer looked from Brenda's indignant face to Alex's stony one. He looked at the passengers, all craning their necks. This was a customer service nightmare, a potential viral video in the making. Sir, the first officer said, his voice a tired plea. We just need to verify everything. Can you just work with us here? Work with you. Alex's control finally began to fray. I have worked with you. I booked the flight, submitted the paperwork, got the approval boarded when I was told, and showed your crew my private medical information. What more work do you expect me to do? Do you want me to scream in agony to convince you? Do you want me to show you the scars? His voice cracked on the last word, a raw edge of anguish slipping through his carefully constructed composure. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was hurt. The humiliation was profound. They had stripped him of his dignity layer by layer in front of a captive audience. Brenda saw her opening. He's becoming aggressive, Captain, she said to the first officer, her eyes wide with feigned alarm. I am not going to ask you again, sir, the first officer said, his tone hardening. He was siding with his crew. We need to resolve this now. If you can't stand up and move to a different seat, we're going back to the gate. That was it, the final impossible demand. If you can't stand up. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. The one thing he spent hours a day in agonizing physical therapy trying to do, the one action that represented a return to normalcy to his life, to his job, was now being thrown at him as a challenge. A test of his honesty. He looked at the first officer. He looked at Brenda's triumphant smirk. He saw the faces of the other passengers, a jury that had already convicted him. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. The discipline. The training, the practiced calm, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a scene. He'd give them a finale they would never forget. Silence descended upon the cabin, thick and expectant. The first officer's challenge hung in the air. If you can't stand up. It was a verdict, and a sentence delivered with the weary authority of a man who just wanted the problem to disappear. Alex looked down at his left leg hidden beneath the denim. He thought of the surgeon doctor, Matthews, who had pieced his tibia back together with a titanium rod and a dozen screws. He remembered the first time he'd tried to put weight on it, the blinding, white-hot pain that had buckled his knees and left him gasping on the floor of the physical therapy room. He remembered the sweat, the grit, the daily soul-crushing effort to coax life back into the limb. And he thought of why it was broken, a pre-dawn raid on a warehouse in Baltimore. The splintering of the door, the chaos, the shout of gun from his partner. He'd shoved Peterson out of the way, taking the brunt of a fleeing suspect's desperate tackle, a 250-pound man who sent him crashing backward over a stack of pallets. The snap of his bone had been sickeningly loud, a sound he still heard in his nightmares. He'd saved his partner's life, but sacrificed his own mobility. All that pain, all that sacrifice reduced to a cheap drama over a seat assignment. He looked at Brenda. Her face was a mask of smug victory. She had won. She had backed the big, scary black man into a corner he couldn't get out of. He looked at the first officer, whose face was a study in impatient resignation. Then Alex's gaze swept over the passengers. He saw their judgment, their suspicion, and in a few faces like Dorothy's, a flicker of pained sympathy. They were all witnesses. "You want me to stand up?" Alex's voice was unnervingly soft. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. That would resolve the issue, the first officer said stiffly. "If you can stand and walk, you can move to another seat. And if I can't, then we have to assume your claim is legitimate, but the situation has escalated. The captain wants to avoid any further conflict in the air. We'd still return to the gate to de-escalate," the first officer said, the corporate speak sounding hollow and absurd. It was a no-win situation designed to force him out. Alex nodded slowly, a dark understanding dawning in his eyes. He now saw the game for what it was. There was no path to victory for him here. Only a choice between different kinds of humiliation. So he chose a third path. He began to move. Slowly, carefully, he pushed his backpack under the seat in front of him. He planted his right foot firmly on the floor. He could feel Dorothy beside him holding her breath. With his right hand, he gripped the armrest, his knuckles turning white. With his left, he reached across and braced himself on the back of the seat in front. The entire cabin was dead silent, save for the faint whine of the auxiliary power unit. He began to push. A low grunt escaped his lips, a sound torn from the very depths of his being. The muscles in his right leg and back screamed in protest, but the sharpest agony came from his left leg as pressure, however slight, began to transfer to it. It felt like 1,000 shards of glass grinding against the bone. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The cabin light seemed to swim before his eyes. He was rising. Inch by agonizing inch. Brenda's smirk faltered. This wasn't the reaction she expected. He wasn't supposed to be able to do this. He was halfway up now, trembling his body a taut wire of pure agony and willpower. He locked his right knee, taking most of the weight. He was unstable, swaying slightly, but he was on his feet. He had stood. He let go of the seat in front of him, his hand shaking. He stood there for a moment, a towering, imposing figure in the narrow aisle, breathing heavily. The pain was a roaring inferno in his leg, but his face was a mask of cold fury. "There," he gasped, his voice raspy. "I'm standing. Are you satisfied?" Brenda was speechless, her jaw slack. The first officer looked stunned, but Alex wasn't finished. His left hand moved not toward another seat, but to the back of his jeans tucked into his waistband. With a fluid motion that bespoke years of ingrained practice, he pulled out a small black leather wallet. He didn't open it at first. He just held it in his palm, letting the weight of it settle. He let his gaze drift from Brenda to the first officer, then to the silent, watching passengers. "You questioned my integrity," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that commanded the attention of every single person on board. "You publicly accused me of fraud. You humiliated me. You did all this because you looked at me and you decided who and what I was." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You judged a book by its cover," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to the back of the plane. "Now, let me show you the title page." He flicked the wallet open. There, against the dark leather, gleamed a gold badge, the iconic seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Below it, his identification card, clear and stark: Alex Vance, Special Agent. The collective gasp in the cabin was audible. Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. The first officer's face went pale, the blood draining from it, as if a plug had been pulled. But the most satisfying reaction was Brenda's. The color drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly mottled white. The smugness, the certainty, the power, it all dissolved into pure, unadulterated horror. She looked from the badge to Alex's face, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a freeloader, but as an agent of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. An agent she had just harassed, threatened, and forced to stand on a grievously injured leg. Alex held the badge aloft for a long, silent moment. The plane, which had been taxiing, came to a gentle stop on the tarmac. It seemed even the pilots in the cockpit could feel the sudden dramatic shift in the atmosphere. He had stood up, and in doing so, he had brought them all to their knees. The silence that followed the reveal of the badge was different. It was no longer the quiet of suspense, but the heavy, suffocating silence of shock and regret. The gold shield seemed to absorb all the sound in the cabin. Alex held his position for another 5 seconds, a statue carved from pain and vindication, letting the reality of the situation cement itself in everyone's mind. Then, with an audible hiss of breath, he began the torturous process of lowering himself back into his seat. The descent was even more painful than the ascent, and he couldn't completely stifle a groan as his weight settled and his leg screamed in protest. He slumped back, chest heaving, a sheen of cold sweat on his brow. The first officer was the first to find his voice, though it was now several octaves higher than before and laced with a panicked urgency. "Agent Vance, sir, I apologize. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Brenda was still frozen, her face a mask of dawning dread. She looked like she had just seen a ghost, or worse, the end of her career. "There's been no misunderstanding." Alex said, his voice low and tight with exhaustion and pain. "Your flight attendant made a judgment. You backed her play. The only misunderstanding was on your part. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like for this plane to take off so I can get to my sister's wedding." The first officer practically scrambled back to the cockpit. A moment later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, stripped of its usual folksy charm, and replaced with a tone of strained formality. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay. We will be underway momentarily. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Brenda flinched at the command. She gave Alex one last terrified look before scurrying to her jump seat, her movements jerky and robotic. The flight from that point on was a masterclass in awkwardness. The other flight attendants who had watched the drama unfold from a distance now treated Alex's row as a no-fly zone, their smiles strained whenever they had to pass. Brenda, in particular, was a wreck. During the beverage service, she delegated his aisle to a junior colleague. She spent the majority of the 3-hour flight in the galley, hidden behind the thin curtain, presumably contemplating her life choices. Dorothy, the woman in the window seat, waited until they were at cruising altitude before leaning over. "That was the most incredible and horrifying thing I have ever witnessed on an airplane," she said softly. "Are you all right, dear? Your leg?" Alex managed a weak smile. "It hurts, but thank you for speaking up for me." "It was nothing," she said, patting his arm gently. "Common decency isn't so common anymore, it seems." They spent the rest of the flight in a comfortable silence, a small island of sanity in a sea of tension. Upon landing at Dallas-Fort Worth, the disembarking process was just as strange. As the seatbelt sign switched off, the captain's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived in Dallas. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate. And, on behalf of the entire crew of American Airlines Flight 1776, I would like to offer a sincere and profound apology to Special Agent Vance for the unprofessional and unacceptable events that occurred prior to departure. We wish you a pleasant stay in Dallas." A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the plane. The apology broadcast to everyone was the final public vindication. As people began to stand, no one in the surrounding rows moved. They waited, giving him a wide berth. When the ground crew brought his wheelchair to the door, a different gate agent, a manager by the look of his suit, was there, his face etched with concern. "Agent Vance," the manager said, his voice hushed. "My name is George Hill. I'm the station manager. I'm so sorry. So deeply sorry. Is there anything at all we can do?" "Anything you need." "I need to get to my family," Alex said wearily. As he was wheeled through the terminal, he felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. His phone was already buzzing. A video of the incident shot by a passenger a few rows back was already rocketing its way through the digital universe. He saw the title of a shared link: "Flight attendant accuses man of faking injury, gets shut down by FBI." He ignored it and answered the call from his sister, Amelia. "Alex, oh my God, are you okay? David just showed me this video. It's everywhere. What happened?" Her voice was frantic with worry. "I'm fine, Leah. Just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding? They humiliated you. I'm going to kill David for what he texted you." "Don't," Alex said, rubbing his tired eyes. "I'm almost at baggage claim. I'll see you in a few minutes." He arrived to find Amelia, his mother, and David waiting. Amelia ran to him, hugging him carefully. His mother, a woman whose face was a road map of a life spent worrying about her 2 sons, fussed over him, her eyes wet with tears. David stood back, arms crossed, a complicated expression on his face. It wasn't sympathy. It was something closer to annoyed resignation. "Well," David said, breaking the silence as they walked toward the exit. "You made it. And right on schedule, you brought the thunder and lightning with you." "David, stop it," his mother chided. "What? The man can't go 5 feet without flashing a badge and making the national news." David shot back, gesturing at Alex. "I told you to keep a low profile. Is that concept just completely foreign to you?" The warmth of his family's welcome evaporated, replaced by the familiar icy chill of his brother's resentment. The drama on the plane was over, but Alex knew the main event was just about to begin. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private room at a swanky Dallas steakhouse, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and lighting so dim it felt conspiratorial. The air was thick with the scent of seared meat and expensive perfume. For Alex, it was another form of confinement, more luxurious than the airplane cabin, but just as suffocating. He sat at the long table between his mother, who kept patting his hand as if to reassure herself he was real, and his sister Amelia, who was trying desperately to radiate bridal joy despite the storm clouds gathering over her family. David sat directly across from him, a silent, smirking judge. For the first hour, a fragile truce held. Small talk reigned. Relatives and friends of the groom came by to greet Alex, their expressions a mixture of awe and pity. They'd all seen the video. He was no longer just Amelia's brother. He was a minor celebrity, the FBI agent from the viral clip. He answered their questions with polite, one-word answers. The pain in his leg, a dull, constant reminder of the performance he'd been forced to give. The truce shattered when Amelia's future father-in-law, a jovial man named Robert, clapped David on the shoulder. "Your brother is a real hero, David. You must be proud." David managed a tight, unconvincing smile. "We're all very impressed by Alex's career." The word impressed was delivered with the same temperature as a block of ice. Later, while Amelia was occupied with her bridesmaids, David leaned across the table, his voice low and cutting. "You love this, don't you?" Alex looked up from his plate. "Love what David being publicly shamed and having to use my credentials to stop it. The attention, the drama." Special Agent Vance swooping in, David sneered. "You couldn't just be a man in a wheelchair. You had to be a hero. You always have to be the hero. It wasn't a choice. It's always a choice." David's voice rose, turning heads at the table. "You chose a job where you get shot at and tackled. You chose to chase adrenaline instead of building a real life." Dad made the same damn choices. The name hung in the air between them, a ghost at the feast. Their father, a decorated police detective, had died in the line of duty when Alex was 19 and David was 24. He'd been killed during a routine traffic stop that turned violent. It was the defining tragedy of their lives, but they had walked away from it on two completely different paths. For Alex, it was an inspiration. For David, it was a cautionary tale. "Don't you bring him into this?" Alex warned, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why not?" "It's the perfect parallel." David pushed his chair back, his face flushed with anger and wine. He died for a headline, for a plaque on a wall. He left Mom a widow and us without a father. And you're running down the exact same path, collecting injuries like souvenirs. What's this one for, Alex? A promotion, a medal. Was it worth being crippled for 6 months? Their mother gasped. "David? That is enough." But David was beyond reason. The resentment he'd harbored for years was spilling out raw and unfiltered. "No, it's not enough. I'm the one who had to stay here, Mom. I'm the one who had to be responsible, who had to build a career that didn't involve Mom waiting for a phone call in the middle of the night while he's out playing cops and robbers. I'm the one making sure you're taken care of. I'm the one who has to watch my brother slowly kill himself, just like Dad did." Every word was a hammer blow. Alex felt the air leave his lungs. This was the root of it all. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was fear. David wasn't angry at Alex. He was terrified for him, and terrified of being left behind to pick up the pieces again. His anger was a shield for his grief and his fear. Alex's own anger began to subside, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. He looked at his brother, the successful investment banker in the $1,000 suit, and saw the scared kid who had lost his father and was now terrified of losing his brother too. "The man I tackled, Alex," said, his voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil, "was about to shoot my partner in the back of the head. My partner has 3 young daughters, David. So yes. To me, it was worth it." He didn't say it with pride. He said it with a weariness that went bone deep. It was a simple statement of fact, a glimpse into the brutal calculus of his world. A world David could never understand. David stared at him, his chest heaving. There was no victory in his eyes, only pain. He opened his mouth to say something else, but no words came out. He abruptly stood up, threw his napkin on the table, and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Amelia rushed back to the table, her face pale. What happened? Where is David going? Alex just shook his head, the weight of his brother's words pressing down on him heavier than any physical injury. The family drama he had been dreading wasn't just a scene. It was a wound that had been festering for over a decade, and he had just torn it wide open. The wedding day dawned bright and oppressively sunny. Alex stood on the balcony of his hotel room, looking out over the manicured lawns of the sprawling golf resort where the ceremony would take place. He was dressed in his tuxedo, the pants specially tailored to accommodate the slim-line brace on his leg. He leaned heavily on a sleek black cane, having graduated from the wheelchair for short distances. Each step was a carefully negotiated truce with pain. The fight with David had left a toxic residue over the entire weekend. They had avoided each other, communicating only through the strained buffer of their mother and sister. Amelia was a ball of nerves, her bridal bliss tainted by her brother's Cold War. Alex's phone buzzed. It was his partner, Agent Peterson. "Don't tell me you're calling to congratulate me on my viral fame," Alex said, his voice flat. "Funny," Peterson's voice crackled on the other end. "I'm calling about something a little more important. You remember our friend Alistair Finch?" How could he forget Alistair Finch was the reason Alex had been in that Baltimore warehouse in the first place? Finch was a ghost, a high-level financier suspected of laundering hundreds of millions of dollars for international cartels. He was untouchable, insulated by layers of shell corporations and high-priced lawyers. The man Alex had tackled was a low-level bagman, their first real chance to get a witness who could tie Finch to the dirty money. "What about him?" Alex asked, his attention sharpening. "We've been tracking his financials, trying to find the next weak link. We got a hit last night. A big one. He's been funneling money through a mid-size investment firm based out of Dallas. A firm called Sterling Wakefield. The name didn't register at first." "Okay. The transfers are being authorized by a senior vice president there. A real rising star, apparently. They think he's the next big thing." A cold, sickening dread started to pool in Alex's stomach. It was the same feeling he got just before a raid, the sense that the world was about to tilt on its axis. Peterson. "Who is it? What's the name of the VP?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Peterson knew the devastating impact of the words he was about to say. "His name is David Vance." Alex's cane clattered against the tiled floor of the balcony. He grabbed the railing to steady himself, his knuckles white. The Dallas skyline blurred in his vision. "No, it can't be. David," he whispered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. "My brother." "I'm sorry, man," Peterson said, his voice full of genuine regret. "We ran it 3 times. It's him. We don't think he's a willing participant. Finch is a master at using legitimate people as cutouts. He finds ambitious guys who are good at their jobs, but maybe don't ask too many questions about the source of the capital they're managing. He butters them up, makes them feel like geniuses, and uses their legitimate accounts to wash his dirty money. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. David's rapid success, his expensive lifestyle, his condescending attitude about Alex's messy, unprofitable heroism. David wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a mark. A highly intelligent, ambitious, and ultimately naive pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. "There's more," Peterson said, his voice grim. "We have chatter that Finch is getting nervous. The arrest of that bagman spooked him. He's consolidating his assets, preparing to disappear. And he has a history of cleaning up loose ends." Cleaning up loose ends. The phrase sent a bolt of pure ice through Alex's veins. David wasn't just complicit. He was in danger. Mortal danger. "Where is Finch now?" Alex demanded. That's the other reason I'm calling, Peterson said. According to our intel, he's in Dallas. He flew in yesterday on a private jet. He's here to meet with his key asset. He's here to meet with your brother. Alex's mind raced, connecting the dots in a constellation of terror. David's success. The firm. The money. The danger. And then the final soul-crushing piece fell into place. He remembered a stray comment Amelia had made weeks ago, gushing about the wedding guest list. David's biggest client is even coming, she had said. He's some super-rich investor. David's been trying to land him for years. He said it's the biggest deal of his career. His name is Alistair Finch. Finch wasn't just coming to Dallas to meet David. He was coming to the wedding. The professional and the personal had just collided with the force of a nuclear bomb. The family drama, the fight, David's resentment. It all seemed like a childish game now. His brother, the man he had been at war with, was walking into a trap, and the predator was about to join them to celebrate a family wedding. The ceremony was in less than 2 hours. The clock was ticking. Alex found David in the opulent groom's suite, a space filled with the scent of leather and cedar and the nervous energy of men in tuxedos. David was the calm center of the storm, meticulously adjusting his bow tie in a large, gilt-edged mirror. He was performing the role of the successful older brother, the anchor of the family with practiced ease. David Alex said, his voice quiet, but carrying the force of a battering ram. He shut the heavy oak door behind him, the click of the latch silencing the cheerful chatter in the room. The groomsman looked up, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "I need to talk to you. Alone. Now." David turned from the mirror, his carefully constructed smile faltering at the raw intensity in Alex's eyes. "Alex, for God's sake, look around." He gestured vaguely at the others. "Whatever this is, it can wait. I am not getting into it with you today. Not today." "There is no later, David," Alex insisted, taking a measured step into the room. He leaned on his cane, the subtle tap on the plush carpet punctuating his words. The groomsman, sensing a deep and private conflict, began to discreetly file out mumbling excuses about checking on the rings or finding the photographer. When they were alone, the silence was thick with years of unspoken grievances. "This isn't about us," Alex began, his voice level. "This isn't about Dad or my leg or the scene on the airplane. This is about your job, your success. It's about a client of yours at Sterling Wakefield, a man named Alistair Finch." The name landed like a physical blow. David visibly recoiled, his face paling beneath his tan. He looked not at Alex, but at the closed door, as if expecting Finch himself to walk through it. How do you know that name? Have you been investigating me?" The question was laced with a new kind of fear, mingled with his old indignation. "Don't be ridiculous," Alex shot back, his patience wearing thin. "I investigate criminals, not accountants who get played for fools. Finch isn't your biggest client, David. He's the primary target of a multi-agency federal task force investigating the laundering of cartel money. A task force I am on. The raid where I was injured, we were grabbing one of his bagmen." David stared, his mind visibly struggling to process the information. Denial was his first line of defense. "That's insane. It's slanderous. Alistair is a titan of industry. He's respected all over the world. This is some kind of mistake. Or you're just jealous. You see my success. Something I built in the real world with my mind, not my fists, and you want to tear it down. Was it your mind that vetted him?" Alex pressed his voice like cold steel, cutting through David's blustering. "Or did his 9-figure investment portfolio do the talking for him? Did you once, even once, run a deep source of funds check on the initial capital? Or were you too busy counting your commissions and patting yourself on the back for being a genius? The kind of genius who doesn't realize he's washing money for the same kind of people who put our father in the ground." The mention of their father was a low blow, but a necessary one. David staggered back as if he'd been physically struck, collapsing into a plush armchair. The fight went out of him, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." "The money you've been managing," Alex continued, pressing the advantage, "paid for the guns that killed a DEA agent in Mexico last year. It financed a human trafficking ring we busted in Houston. It's blood money, David, and the man who earned it is coming here today to your wedding. But he's not coming to toast your happiness. He's coming because the arrest of his bagman spooked him. He's shutting down his operation, and a senior VP at a Dallas firm who knows all his account numbers is the biggest loose end he needs to tie up." The full, catastrophic truth crashed down on David. His success was a sham. His life's work was a conduit for filth. And his greatest client was a predator who now saw him as a liability. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Oh my God," he choked out. "The things I said to you, what have I done?" Seeing his brother utterly broken, Alex felt the tactical fury drain away, leaving only a deep, familiar ache. He hobbled over, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "You were arrogant. You were willfully blind. But you weren't a criminal. He found your weak spot, your pride, and he exploited it. But the time for regret is over. Right now, I need you to stop being a victim and start being an asset." For the next half hour, the groom's suite became a high-stakes command center. Alex was on the phone with his partner Peterson, relaying the situation with terse, coded language. A Dallas-based FBI tactical team was already moving, setting up a discreet perimeter around the resort, their agents disguised as hotel staff valets and even wedding guests. Alex turned his full attention to his brother. He coached him, drilled him, transforming him from a terrified civilian into the key player in a federal sting. You cannot break character, do you understand? When you see him, you smile. You are the confident, successful man who landed the whale. You will greet him, you will laugh at his jokes. During the reception, you will offer him a celebratory cigar, one of the expensive Cubans you told me about. You'll suggest the private library to smoke them. My team will be waiting. Can you do that, David? David looked up, his face pale and drawn, but a flicker of his old determination had returned now, forged in terror instead of ambition. He nodded, his jaw tight. Yes, I can do that. The ceremony was an exercise in supreme tension. As Amelia, breathtakingly beautiful and blissfully unaware, walked down the aisle, Alex stood near the back, his eyes scanning everything. He saw his brother at the altar, looking surprisingly composed. He saw his mother weeping tears of joy. And he saw Alistair Finch in the third row, exuding charm, even nodding respectfully as the vows were exchanged. Alex watched the subtle signals, the agent posing as an usher, who met his gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod, the waitress near the side entrance, who adjusted her apron, signaling her position was set. The reception began. Finch was magnetic, congratulating Amelia, sharing a charming anecdote with her father-in-law and raising a glass to David. At one point, Finch approached Alex. "You must be the famous brother," Finch said, his smile never quite reaching his cold, analytical eyes. "David speaks so highly of you. A man of action, I understand. I do hope your leg heals quickly." It was a power play, a veiled reference to the world of violence they both knew. "It will," Alex said evenly, meeting his gaze. "Sometimes you have to break a few things to clean up a mess." Finch's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before he laughed and moved on. The threat had been acknowledged and returned. An hour later, Alex watched as David, champagne glass in hand, executed the plan flawlessly. He approached Finch with a conspiratorial smile, presented the cedar box of cigars, and leaned in to suggest the library. As they walked away from the music and laughter, David placed a hand on Finch's back, a gesture of camaraderie that was in reality a signal. The moment they cleared the doorway to the hushed, book-lined corridor, it happened. Two men in crisp catering uniforms stepped from an alcove blocking their path. Two more materialized behind them, sealing the exit. They moved with a fluid, silent efficiency that spoke of endless training. Alistair Finch, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and utterly devoid of emotion. Finch's affable mask dissolved. His body tensed, and he shot David a look of such pure, venomous hatred it was chilling. The mask was gone. The monster was exposed. "You foolish, pathetic boy," he hissed. "FBI," the agent said, the badge appearing as if from nowhere. "You're under arrest for violations of the RICO Act and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Finch made a small, aborted movement, but the agents were on him in an instant, their hands expertly controlling him before he could take a breath. As they cuffed him, his eyes locked on David one last time. "Your entire family will regret this day," he snarled, before being led away down a service hallway, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Much later, as the party wound down, David found Alex on the terrace overlooking the resort lights. The cool night air felt clean after the day's suffocating tension. "He would have killed me," David said. It wasn't a question. "He'd have made it look like an accident, or maybe just made me disappear. No more loose end." "Yes," Alex confirmed softly. David leaned against the balustrade, the perfect silk of his tuxedo, seeming like a costume from another lifetime. "My entire life I ran from what happened to Dad. I told myself that his way, the path of risk and duty, was foolish. I thought building wealth, building a safe life, was the smart choice, the responsible choice." He gave a hollow, bitter laugh. "I built my safe little house on a foundation of sand, with money from men just like the one who killed him. And when it started to crumble, the only person who could save me was the one I resented for being just like Dad." He finally turned to Alex, his eyes clear of artifice and filled with a profound, humbling shame and gratitude. "You didn't just save my life, Alex. You saved me from myself." Alex looked from his brother's face to the distant lights of the party where their sister was dancing, safe and happy. "That's what family is for," he said. The war between them was finally over. A new, more honest foundation had been laid, cemented not by wealth or success, but by a shared, terrifying truth and the simple, undeniable bond of brotherhood. That day on American Airlines Flight 1776, and in a sun-drenched Dallas ballroom, two very different battles were fought and won. One was a public fight for dignity against prejudice, a viral moment that exposed the snap judgments we make about strangers. But the other, deeper battle was for the soul of a family, a silent war between two brothers torn apart by grief and misunderstanding. Alex Vance was forced to reveal his badge to prove his worth to a flight attendant, but he was forced to use his skills as an agent to save the brother who had resented him for those very skills. In the end, it wasn't the badge that defined him, but the quiet courage to face down humiliation on a plane, and the unwavering love to face down a killer for his family. This story reminds us that the deepest wounds are often the ones we can't see, and the truest heroes are not defined by their uniforms, but by the sacrifices they make when no one is watching. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas that explore the heart of the human experience. Click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening.